love this because Troy Franklin has one of the most complex route trees I've seen run, and he's flawless about it.
I saw your graph. I don't like it.
He's great. It's awesome.
Yeah. It's like
turn up your volume. Because you're about to listen to The Sick Podcast. With Draft Vogel.
With the first pick in the 2021 NFL Draft. The first pick in the 2022 NFL Draft. With the first pick in the 2023 NFL Draft.
The sickest NFL Draft Show. It's gonna be sick.
Welcome into the Sick Podcast with Draft Vogel. I'm John Vogel, your host. On the show tonight with me, Jarvis, Mark Jarvis at Jarvis Scouting, and Gam at Gam Scouting, Justin Gamble. And we're continuing off of an episode that we had left off last week, talking about players that we learned our biggest lessons from and all that stuff. But first off, gentlemen, tonight, how are we doing?
killing it, dude. Got the Nicolas Cage mug out for you guys. Check this out. You're my national treasure. I mean, come on. Getting all caffeinated up for this one.
Stick to my Eagles.
I was a nerd, man. Jeez.
Hey, I actually, if I was at home, I have a Monty Python mug that's just got like 15 Monty Python quotes on it and the little images that they would put up and throughout the whole thing. You ever, please, Gam, you look lost. Please tell me you've watched some Monty Python.
Yeah, I know Monty Python. Yeah, I know Monty Python. My face just does stupid shit.
Yeah, you were looking lost for a second, so I was like worried about it. Or I was like, it's just got all their like famous quotes and the little illustrated graphics they pop up. The sun, from
I got you. They fit
the,
all that on a mug, huh?
Yeah, it's awesome. I got it for Christmas because I'm a huge Monty Python guy. I love Monty Python.
It's nice.
I could do a whole podcast about Monty Python. We're not going to do that. We're in the middle of draft season, so.
For another time.
So, anyways, I think, Jarvis, you were going to start this thing off because you had another guy to get through with lessons that you've learned.
Yeah, I've been stewing for like a week. You give me all this time. So I got two guys that I wanted to do that were guys that kind of taught me lessons.
Hey, Mark.
Go ahead.
Real quick question, just for the listeners and viewers. When did you start evaluating players? Because I feel like I remember you doing this a long time ago, and we've communicated, in this industry and whatever on Twitter for a long, long, long time. But I don't really remember like what class you started at.
Like first profile written.
Yeah, or like when you were like first. You remember like, I studied a lot of players from that class. You know what I mean?
I watched some guys like 14, 15, 16, but first class I actually did like wrote profiles on was 17. That was when I actually got into it.
Okay.
Good to know. Okay. That correctly. I remembered that correctly. So it was 17.
I thought it was around there. I just wanted to see. Okay, cool.
Because I'm going to be straight with you. With the whole Jake Fromm QB1 thing, I never thought we'd be doing a podcast together at that point. You know what
Who
I'm saying?
had
like QB1?
I don't think you did.
No,
he had first.
I had Herbert won that year.
Yeah, he banged that year. I remember people were mad at
what
him.
was the graphic? There was a graphic that was floating around in it.
I think it was Kurt
people
Banker.
Like trolling you. No, it wasn't Bank. It was definitely Jake Fromm. And it was like
I had Fromm up there. I thought Fromm was up there.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it was like the Bengals take Jake Fromm first overall. And
that was a meme. That wasn't an actual. No, that wasn't an actual opinion. I did that the year after with Bailey Zappi too, and shared that. That was the Texans take Bailey Zappi one. Anywho, so yeah, speaking of the Herbert year, so Joe Burrow, I know you guys probably remember that one. Anyone who's around draft Twitter in the 2020-ish range probably remembers that one. I was really, really hard on Burrow, and I say that not in terms of like, oh, he's undraftable, he's terrible. Like, I thought he was starter material. I thought he was a decent player.
We were both hard on him.
I had a bunch of stuff wrong with him, though. So, first off, my round grade system was a complete mess. So, I had him like as a starter, but I had him in round 4. So, the whole round grade system I had set up was just a wreck. But I think the thing that stood out to me looking back on Burrow was failure to adjust and then incorrect adjustment. So, I watched all the senior quarterbacks that year going into their senior year. So, I saw Burrow's junior tape. I knew what he looked like on junior tape. He looked more like a late round guy, right? Yeah. So then I go into watching the first game of the year. What was that, Texas? I think they played like a cupcake game against like McNeese and then beat up Texas. So it was like week 2 against Texas I watched. Okay. And then I kind of nudged him up a little bit from there. Okay, maybe he's more like, instead of being potential PFA, maybe he's 7th, 6th round type guy. And then I didn't revisit until later on in the year. When I revisited, it was like after he had already, beat up Alabama, and it was kind of like he became Joe Burrow. And so I came in with that view of, okay, I had this guy like 7th-ish range at the start of the year. And so I didn't adjust nearly enough. I kind of stuck too much to those priors. And that's part of the reason why I think I got him wrong, was just I clung to, hey, this is what I saw last year. This is what I saw early in the year, instead of seeing, hey, this is truly who the guy is, letting go of those early views and then recognizing that he was a number 1 overall pick.
I mean, that was a tough year, though. That was, because his first year at LSU, people were like, yeah, he's got a day 3 grade, late day 3. And even I remember the start of his senior year, whatever, there when he won the national championship and everything. And even halfway through the year, I'm like, wow, this is surgical. What he's doing to these college teams is like just straight assault. But it doesn't change the fact that he's thin. His arm is weak as hell in college. He transfers his weight, like his mechanics are a little wonky, which probably, attributed to the weak arm. Anything outside the numbers was trash. You just could see like, all right, this is like the tools are probably a little below average for what we're looking at as far as like top 15 players. So it really was pretty difficult to say, screw all those things that we usually look for in quarterbacks. He's just that good. You know what I mean? Because I was really hard on him too, and I ended up having him, I was like, he's a top 10 player for me, but I could see why a team would let him drop to, maybe the late first round, just because that arm's weak. There's no way around it. The arm is hella weak. And there were so many flaws on tape that you're like, all right, well, when he's not asked to do those certain things, he's annihilating these college teams. But he also had Jamar Chase and Jefferson and some of these other guys that were on that team that it was just, they were running through people. But it really was, I think, I agree with you, Mark, tough to kind of meet yourself in the middle and wonder, like, how good can this guy be as an NFL player when he's not ideal? Like, he's not ideal for what we're going to see as a usual first overall pick as far as the arm, the athleticism, some of that other stuff that is just hard to ignore on tape, Well,
it's kind of like with Xavier Legette this year, right? Where you can even look at like a Jayden Daniels, a typical QB at the same school, right? So Jayden Daniels goes into the year. What is he, like a 4th, 5th round guy for a lot of people? Like, what was the what would you guys have said Jayden Daniels entering the year was at?
I hated him.
I've been up and down on the kid because he had a year at Arizona State that was fantastic. I think it was his freshman year, maybe, and then after that he just spiraled.
Well, yeah, because it was his freshman year. They upset Herbert and Oregon.
Yeah, and then he's just
knocked them off.
I thought he was
him. It was like he was so thin, right? Yeah. Like the frame was a concern. And then that first year at LSU, you're watching him, and it's like he's a 1-read quarterback. He's going to take off and run. Yeah. Like, yeah, he's an electric athlete. There's no doubt about it. He takes all those nasty hits. That was concerning.
Yeah. I thought he was a pretty guy.
That's the thing, is if you start with that opinion and you're slow to, I mean, at what point in the year do you adjust and say, okay, this guy's legit. This guy, like, I've seen enough to make that adjustment. And people watch tape at different times, right? Like, I made that bet about him in October? I didn't know he was going to win the Heisman. I didn't know all this stuff was going to unfold, and it did, and it played in my favor there. But like, at that time, he was like considered by most people a 2nd-round guy. Well, then everyone caught up on the Bama tape, and they kind of watched his late season stuff, and they kind of go, okay, let's make those adjustments. I mean, like, Bo Nix is another example of that, right? We've talked about Bo in the past where people kind of clung to that. Hey, this is the Auburn tape it had flashes, but there's a lot of nasty stuff on that Auburn tape. You still hear it talked about when people bring up Bo Nix. It's like, well, he looked terrible at Auburn. It's like, it was 4 years ago. It was his freshman year. Like, I can understand
that team was a mess. But
most guys aren't even starting at that point, right? Like, he's in the SEC as a true freshman starter, just trying to make it work. Like, are you going to judge him based on that, or based on
and it wasn't just
info? And
it wasn't just that. It was he was running Gus Malzahn's system, which he was not a fit for that at all that first year. And then you switch over to that Boise State system, because you hired that guy to come over. I can't remember his name. I remember the girlfriend that he brought with him from Boise. Like, I remember all that. I remember her. I don't remember him, but like, like she looked fine. But like, that's kind of the thing is you've got 2 really bad systems that he just did not fit in. Yeah. and then you let him go to Oregon. He's got a good arm. There's no doubt about that. He can push the ball vertically. So they just spread the field out and said, hey, Bo, just go make decisions. Start throwing the ball.
Yeah. Completely different guy now.
Now, what's funny, when you guys talk about Burrow, because I watched Burrow going into before the 19 season, I spent a day and I went through like all his games and with LSU that I had access to, the cut-ups. Because remember back then, like when all 22, you like couldn't get your hands on, and so you were using the broadcast tape that people were cutting up and posted on YouTube. So, like, I was going through all those games. So I'm sitting there going, I like him. You know, like I like him. Like I like everything that he's doing. I'm just not understanding what's clicking, what's not clicking, why they're not winning games, why they're not coming out here and dominating, because his processing, even his first year, was really good. So it's like, what is not clicking on? And I couldn't put my finger on it. And he comes out there and blows it away. I think I bought in at Texas after the Texas game. And I was like, oh, yeah, he's legit, because everything that my opinion already, I was a little bit higher on him than most people. But then adding, you know, like that start to the year, and they start to build that. The Texas game was massive. And then I think there was a few games, their early SEC games as well were really good before the Alabama game. And it was just like, yeah, man. Like, I remember us arguing about it, Justin, because like I liked Burrow a lot. And you're like, oh yeah, but he's got a noodle arm. I said, look, Peyton Manning had a noodle arm.
No, Peyton Manning did not have a noodle arm. No way.
Yeah.
No. In his final 2 years.
No, he never had a good arm. Never.
But it was better than Burrow's. Like, you watch the early Colts games, and he's slinging that ball, and you're like, yeah, okay, it's not upper echelon NFL, but like, where
did he really get good though?
That's
when he started dealing in below, inside of 20 yards. That's when he really got good, because he understood. His balls died at the end of his throw. I'm a Tennessee fan, bro. Yeah. I loved Peyton Manning. Like
I just think it was a lot better than, like, if you watch him in his early years and Burrow, you're like, all right, Manning has the arm superiority, especially in college. Like, he didn't have a Ryan Leaf arm at the time, but I mean, Peyton Manning, and you talk to any old guys and they're like, no, Manning's arm was underrated. Like, it wasn't weak. It just wasn't arm talent. It wasn't a big time arm, but like, there was no lack where you're like, oh, he can't do that. He can't do that. And where Burrow coming out, anything outside the numbers was a real work in progress. But
yeah, but the thing that they had in common, my point was anticipation and timing. They were masters of it.
Yeah.
That's why I bought into Burrow, because his anticipation was ridiculous. And it was crazy because, it's like Jamar Chase. That goes back into, I think, what we talked about in one episode. If a guy ends up in a different team, is he as good as he is now, as we see him? Mm-hmm. To me, Jamar Chase really struggles those first 10 yards of his route, especially when he's running a vertical. And you don't see a lot of separation, and it's really when he just has this extra gear, he'll bait the defender into it, and he just accelerates. And that's where you see the separation. Yeah. And Burrow and him had that chemistry down so pat that when they were playing at LSU, like, he could time up his throw. Burrow could hit him 40 yards down the field, and it was perfect, and it would be right over his shoulder, like a perfectly thrown ball, because they knew they had that chemistry built with each other. Yeah. So, like, that's what I always looked at, was that when Chase was coming out, I think we talked about this too. I was like, he really needs to go to Cincinnati, because he's already got that chemistry built with Burrow from LSU. And if he goes anywhere else, I'm not sure we're talking about him as a top 5 pick. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it'd probably be a harder job to work him into the offense early on.
Yeah, because you got to build that. Whereas they already had that synergy built, and they were able to just pick up where they left off when Burrow went to the NFL, and Chase wasn't eligible to yet. So it's like,
how did we hijack Mark's segment, by the way?
Oh,
Mark
talking about Burrow.
So sorry, dude.
Burrow was a dude I was very passionate about. I'm sorry.
I think, to go back and answer your question real quick more, I think the point when you adjust your evaluation on somebody is when you kind of see they have staying power, when the way that they're winning and like dominating is sustainable and like repeatable versus Jayden Daniels, got loose on a few of these plays in this game. And yeah, he ran for 200 yards, but will he ever do that again? Or like some of these broken coverages led to this, these big passing plays. I think you more want to see like, oh, this is stuff that they can beat any team with. And these are things he can do against any team, any opponent. And like, this will be his recipe for winning, down the road and in the NFL. And I think that's when you can kind of like adjust the evaluation versus just some fluky shit that happens that probably they won't do next week. You know what I mean?
I think a big part of it is just intellectual humility, to where you can say, okay, I had this opinion 3 months ago when I watched him, but now I watched him again, kind of coming in with fresh eyes and not having that tied in at all, where maybe you end up seeing the same guy, maybe you don't. But I think trying to avoid being anchored to that opinion is just the biggest thing there. And do you want to go into any of your guys? You want me to go the other guy that?
No, keep going. Yeah, keep banging, dude.
Kurt Benkert. And it's so funny to see him go on Twitter and
clown.
Do the whole Daniels QB1 thing and get hit for it the same way I got hit for having Kurt Benkert QB1.
Yeah.
So that for me, I think was just one extreme overconfidence. And just overall the ability to kind of just go against the consensus, right? So like the consensus on Benkert was a late round QB, guy who's not super accurate, guy who maybe has some tools, not super athletic, but can extend a little bit, just too scattershot, right?
Yeah.
And I did not care at all about consensus. I did not care at all about what anyone else's opinion was. I just thought, hey, I like this guy and here's why and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, that is a great way to make yourself look like an idiot, is if you just don't recognize that at all. And then also the over extrapolation part. So I saw maybe, that Miami game where he really tore up Miami, especially in the first half. I think he went like 18 of 18 for like 250 yards, 3 TDs or something. He went nuts against Miami. And then he had one throw against Boise State. It's always ingrained in my head. He rolls out, he stumbles, and he throws it like 70 yards and just it's a dot, right? So I have that play. Dude, I have that play stuck in my mind. I literally, every time I think of it, I can remember the blue field, the way he has this little stumble before he cocks and loads and throws it. Like, and
he was Virginia, right? He played for Virginia.
Yeah, Virginia.
Okay,
Virginia.
Okay, cool.
So that's a perfect example of the over extrapolation. If you take one play, one flash, and then kind of map that to the whole player, it's like, well, I saw him do this. I saw him make this crazy throw. So he must have all this ability that just needs to be brought out, right? And focusing on that one play rather than the overall sample size of, hey, you watch him against Navy and he's missing throws left and right and he's struggling.
It's like the Justin Fields Clemson rep where everyone's like, get you a quarterback that can do this or unleash this guy, and they post that Justin Fields deep throw to Olave against Clemson. And we see that over and over, and I'm like, that's the only play I've ever seen of Justin Fields. Like,
what was the one? There was the one of Skavronsky that was like that. Who was that? Like against Lucas Van Ness? Was that who that was against?
I think it was. Yeah,
and it was like Lucas Van Ness beat Skavronsky once with length, and everyone's like, I saw that clip maybe 30 times.
Yep. And we talked about this in how many episodes ago when we talked about Clelin Ferrell had that one. It was like one game where I think he won 2 reps against Ronnie Stanley when Clemson played Notre Dame, whatever year he came out, and everyone was like, oh, he dominated the top competition. He's obviously a top 5 pick, blah, blah, blah. Then he goes on to be the 4th overall pick. Complete bust. Meanwhile, Ronnie Stanley is one of the best left tackles in the game, but it's that type of thing where, like, don't let that one play or like a few reps dictate your entire evaluation. And it's like Olu Fashanu, this class has gotten banged up in his evaluation for that one game that he had against Ohio State, I feel like. And JT Tumamalo,
two games against Ohio State, the one last year and then the one this year.
Right. And it's like, yeah, he struggled, but like those guys are no slouches. And like, I don't know how you can. He went from being remember, and we talked about this on the podcast early on too. And I asked you, John, I said, is there any chance he's not the first offensive tackle taken? You said no chance. Now I'm like, I'm seeing mocks where he's like the 5th or 6th. And I don't really know what changed because he's still the same guy to me. And I'm usually the guy that's like, I don't like the consensus. Like, I want to, let's back it up here. But I've watched every game and I'm like, I don't see what really dropped this guy. He's still the same great player.
It's a
Big,
hand
long
size that
athlete.
dropped him. I hate
Maybe.
to say that.
But he dropped it before the
got tiny-
combine.
Yeah,
But before the combine,
hands
he
even got
dropped.
measured.
Yeah, he was starting to move down. I'm like, we'll see. But it just feels like that's the
I think he's
overreaction.
still the highest rate. I'm gonna double check this. I think he's got the highest grade I've given anybody in this class.
It's good to hear.
I don't know why. I don't know why he's dropping it. It's just like,
Hell yeah, bro.
I loved his tape. I was like, man, like, give me some Olu Fashanu, man. Like,
So, Mark, real quick, when you, because I don't want to hide, I don't want to take away from you again. I like what you're doing here. Let's just say you're talking to like a young evaluator, or even like a kid on Twitter or whatever, who's trying to bust in the way we all did, probably. How would you say to avoid some of these some of these lessons or speed bumps that you've hit or that we've all hit? And I think, part of it is it just sample size? Is there, you just don't know what you don't know? You haven't watched enough NFL? Like, how would you say to or go about trying to avoid some of these like pitfalls?
It's a good question. Depends who I'm talking to, right? Like,
okay.
Am I talking to someone who has a degree of like humility, someone who's somewhat humble already, who wants to learn, is open-eared, or am I talking to my former self? Right? Like, there's two different ways you can go about it.
Oh, I thought you were going to name drop there for a second, Mark. I'm sorry.
I thought it was too. I thought it was too.
I think we were all thinking the same. No, we're not going to name drop on this. Not on this show.
Can you give me a
like
hint?
That. Everybody thinks of this guy, Mr.
Oh, jeez.
Rhymes with Cryan Roberts.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. No. Okay.
No, we're not going to do that. Let's say you're talking to your former self and you have to talk yourself out of Kurt Benkert, quarterback 1. You have to say, bro, you are wrong. What would you say? Or what would you point to kind of show yourself like, this is not the way to go?
I've thought about this a lot. I don't know what I could have said to talk myself out of it because I was so stubborn, because I hadn't been humbled yet, right? Like, it took years of missing badly to get humbled.
Yeah.
Most people come into this and they put out maybe a few opinions, and they realize if they put out an opinion that's really against consensus, they'll get slammed, and they kind of just like don't want that socially, so they back off it. Whereas I just kind of did it, and it didn't really like phase me. Like, I think that was a good thing to some degree because it allowed me to learn on my own.
Yeah.
But it also kind of limited me in terms of it took longer to learn that, right? Because I would say I'd argue for the consensus thing, but I don't know if I would have gotten myself in the past even read and listen to the stuff that I needed to do to understand it and to apply it and kind of take that mindset of consensus matters. Yeah. I mean, even the viewpoint of, like, for instance, oh, well, the NFL let him go undrafted and you had him this high. You must have been wrong because the NFL thought that. I would have pulled the whole argument of, oh, well, we don't know yet. We've got to wait and see and blah, blah, blah. I don't know what I could have said to get through that would have worked. I think it just took missing on that. I mean, what would you have told me? Like, I know you probably, I don't know if you told me anything back then, but it clearly didn't get through if you did.
I remember, I mean, who was in that quarterback class? Which other
That
guys
was the
were
18
there?
class, I think. That was Darnold, Rosen, Mayfield.
No, was
Jackson Allen. Yeah, it was.
Was it really? Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, the only thing that I remember thinking about Kurt Benkert was, like, first off, the accuracy was all over the place. But again, that can be said for a lot of guys, and sometimes it's kind of subjective, or like, well, what did you expect from him? Because Josh Allen had that same complaint, and I remember thinking, like, bro, he's throwing to 5'11" white kids that are going to be working at Costco next year. They're not open. This system is horrible. They're outmatched. So, like, yeah, his accuracy looks bad, but I think he's just trying to throw his guys into space a lot. He's trying to make them elevate and make plays, and I think that might have been able to have said for Kurt Benkert. But I think the way that he operated down to down was more it wasn't that his accuracy was so scattershot. It was just who he was as a quarterback. And there just wasn't an identity as far as who he was, who he thought he was. Every single play just felt like a new, like a random series of this one has been called, now this one. There was no rhythm. There was no down to down consistency. And I guess that's kind of silly too, because that can be taken with a grain of salt as well. A lot of quarterbacks in college, their offenses, they're just outmatched and their teams suck. So it kind of looks like that. But I think when you just looked at all the pieces with him, it's just, all right, even when guys are open, he's awful. His the way he processes the field is confusing. You know what I mean? And a lot of his timing is what led to his inaccuracies too. Either he was late or just didn't read it correctly. But I mean, that's probably all I could have said to you, because with quarterbacks, like, you know, all of Twitter's debating quarterbacks right now every single day, and it's so subjective, and there's so much nuance to it. And even professionals, like teams, are awful at evaluating quarterbacks, which we can see. So I do think that you have a point, which is like you got to miss here and there, and kind of go back and look at what you missed on and correct your mistakes. But there's not a whole lot more I would have said to you, to be honest with you.
I'm gonna slightly argue with my former self here, and here's kind of how I think I would do it. Right, is the way I viewed Benkert was very much because I whiffed on Mahomes, and I don't think at that point Mahomes had really played, but I kind of I guess I started to lean more towards that type of like big arm upside QB, if that makes sense at that point.
Yeah.
And so I view Benkert as that type of guy where it's like, okay, well, he can make any throw, right? That's what mattered. And I think if I were to go back and kind of talk to my former self, I would say, what's the most important part of being a quarterback, right? Is it making the big throws, or is it moving the chains? Is it consistently getting the yardage that you need to progress upfield, right? Like, and that's hard to define because some QBs, they work in explosive plays, and some QBs kind of work the short game, and you can win in both ways, but one tends to be a little bit less volatile, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so I think I would have to try to convince myself that the short game, the intermediate stuff really matters a lot more than any flash throw that a guy makes downfield, right?
Yeah.
So I think that would probably be the angle I would try to take. I don't know if it would get through because, like I said, I was really, really stubborn, as evidenced by being willing to even publicly say that opinion. And, you know, I'm glad that I learned those lessons from it. But I think, again, that's why I say it just goes back to who you're talking to, right? Like if I were to talk to someone who was my age back then, but they're humble and they're willing to listen and they're trying to learn things rather than assuming they have it figured out, then I can approach it in a different way.
Yeah.
I can approach it from the standpoint of, hey, if you look at all the 4-6 cornerbacks, how many are good? And then you can kind of go, you know, okay, I can get into other stuff like reference classes and all the forecasting crap that I'm into. And like, you know, the stuff that I think makes me accurate now. Yeah. But if someone's just hard headed and not willing to listen at all, you can't do that. You kind of just have to, I mean, you could try to why them to death, sit there and poke holes in them, ask them questions, but you can't be combative, right? Like, I think it's interesting, not to get too far into the weeds. There's a kind of a debate out there. I don't know if it's psychology or what, but essentially, like, is shame good? Is shame like culturally good, right? And so shame is a powerful motivator, right? Like, so if you guys were to sit here and shame me for my opinion, I'd probably have to retract it because we're sitting here every Wednesday, we record, and like, I have to sit with you guys and live through that. So, but at the same time, it's like, is that more effective than trying to like change my mind by sitting there and like unraveling my thought processes? What's the most effective path to get someone to change their mind and try to get them somewhere better?
Are you asking? Because I don't know.
No. I think it's just an interesting question. I lean away from the shame side because I don't think it's an effective way. I think it's better to just sit there. Like, you've seen this with some of the stuff we talk about, right? Like, when I why question you, it's not like me just trying to like be an ass and poke at you. It's trying to understand what your thinking is. So like, you, like, for instance, the one we had about Daniels, where it was like, it's clearly a confidence issue. It's like, well, how do you know? Yeah. It's not like a asshole question. It's like, well, how do you know that? Because we're going by that assumption. Let's unravel that assumption and see where it takes us.
Did we bring that up? That quote I sent you from Brian Kelly, you guys, did we bring that up on the pod yet, or we haven't yet?
No, we haven't brought it up yet.
Oh, okay.
I've been waiting for you to do it too. Like, you know,
I forgot about it, but it was just for everyone listening. It was McShay was talking to Brian Kelly, and Brian Kelly was actually okay. Yeah,
here's the quote. So Kelly said, "Jayden needs to learn to trust it. If he learns to trust his eyes, his reads, the timing of his receivers' routes, there's nothing he can't do." He went on to say, "I'm just telling you right now, Todd. Jayden processes quickly. He could throw accurately with anticipation, but now I just need to get him to trust it and let it rip. If we can unlock that in him, he will take off. Right now, he wants to see it come open before pulling the trigger. And the media loves that he's gone 5 games without interception. But I'm like, just throw a pick and get the streak over with so we can get aggressive."
Yeah. And that's what I meant when I said, like, no coach is like, don't throw the open ball. Like, bro, do it. Throw it. run our offense, run the plays I've called for you, and if it goes poorly, we'll learn from it. But I don't think it's a evaluation killer, what I've seen on tape from Jayden. Not to get too far into him right now, but it's hard over and over to see people come open, and he waits, doesn't throw it, and then runs because Brian Kelly's on the sideline like, God damn it, just throw the ball. It's nice that you ran out of it, but in the NFL, you need to hit that. Like we've seen Lamar, who's a more dynamic runner, really, like when we talk about this too, really have to adjust and become this amazing middle of the field passer, and he has been. But there were times in his career so far where there's games where teams bottle him up, and then he starts not trusting it, and he starts not moving the chains, and he's not athletic enough to run out of it all the time because NFL athletes and defenders are equally as athletic. So I think at some point you really have to be that true dual threat, and it starts with moving the chains as a passer, and then after that, your mobility should be your secondary. But I'm glad I found that quote because it was on my mind, and then I forgot about it on the podcast, and I was like, shit, now I look like an asshole. And I didn't say exactly what I was reading about like 3 days ago. So
yeah, I've got a really important part of that to throw in here too.
Yes.
The conversation was in 2022.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind too, of that it's an older quote. It's from, a season where he definitely looked a lot less confident, in my opinion, that he was, when it came to throwing.
Well, yeah, it's 2022. We said it earlier on this show. He's a one-read quarterback. And then he was taking off and he was running. That was who he was. Yeah. I mean, so
now he's a Heisman winner.
It's funny that we're circling back to this. I didn't ever answer this question, but because I got on my Burrow tangent, passion and all that for a really good evaluation I had. Anyways.
You liked the first overall pick. Congrats.
I did. And I argued with you morons about it too.
Yeah.
So anyways, no, I think you want to change your evaluation and you want to adjust it. When you start, you got to keep it to the facts, right? So in Jayden's case, I switched my evaluation on him because I hated him coming into the year as a pro quarterback. I thought career backup at best, might be out of the league quickly, might flash and burn because, how many one-read quarterbacks have we seen, even with being the athletes that they are, come in the league and make it? Not many.
It's tough. You really have to have an offense. Like Jalen Hurts is probably still a guy I'd say there's a lot of times he's a one-reader, but they have weapons and they do it the right way to where a lot of things are, great route concepts, or they have dogs on the outside that they can say, keep it to that one read.
It's a beater, right? So he pre-snap reads, and you've got a beater for different types of coverage, so you know where you're going to go with the ball. And if something changes post-snap, you're going to check it down or run, right? Like that's essentially what the Eagles' system was the last couple of years that got Jalen moving. But I think for me, what changed with Daniels was seeing that he was more than the one-read quarterback. That's when I was like, okay, now I need to take this eval seriously because he's going through 2 reads now. He's getting that second read, sometimes even working to a check down. That tells me right there, okay, now you could be a pro quarterback because you have that athletic ability, you have that arm talent, you've got those tools. Now I'm starting to see the mental processing and all that into play. So that's when I changed. That's when I changed my opinion on Jayden and my evaluation. I took it seriously because up to that point, I really hadn't taken him that seriously as a prospect.
Right, and like we said, now that he shows you he has like that staying power and like something that he can repeat and it's sustainable, then it's like, oh, well, he's serious.
And he's doing it. He's doing it the SEC. That's the other thing. Yeah. Like if you're doing this in the Sun Belt, okay, cool. I'm still going to take a look at you, but I'm not. It's going to be a little bit different. Because the defense.
St. David fails, bro.
Right. No, it's totally different. Totally different. But it's like when you watch him go into those SEC games this year. I know Mississippi State wasn't great, but that was the first game where you really saw, oh shit, like Jayden could get through he can process now. Like there were plays in that game where he's rolling out of the pocket, working to his third read. He's not improving. He's extending the play. And you're like, okay, we got something to work with here. He's taken that next step. So it goes back to that question you asked us a couple months ago, Jarvis, where it's like, what needs to happen to change your mind? I think, Gam, you talked about this too, being something that question's changed your opinion and the way that you approach this stuff. It has for me too, because that's how I kind of approach a prospect. Okay, if I'm going to take him seriously, if I want to take him as a prospect, what has to change for me to take him seriously?
Yeah.
And in Jayden's case, it was strictly he's more than a one-read quarterback. I saw that, bam, I was in it. I was looking at him and I was, okay, we got tools, so we got stuff to work with. So I think you want to approach each evaluation with a question. If I don't like him, what does he have to do for me to like him? You know what I'm saying? What does he have? What?
Go ahead. My bad. I thought you're done.
No. What is that? What is that skill set? What is it? What are those things? At the end of my evaluation, I have a bonus system essentially that finishes the grade. So you have your film grade, and then you got some other stuff. So projected medicals, you could be an A, B, C, D, F. And then on the upside is what I call it. And so that's unrealized potential. And so that's part of the projection, right? When we project guys into the league, we have to kind of guess where we think they're going to be, where they think we're going to be in a few years from now. So how much of that is potential that's untapped, that can be untapped? So like last year, I have an off-season focus every year that I kind of focus on. All right, so like 1 year it was safeties. My safety evaluation sucks. I got to fix that. Consulted with some really good minds on that, got some really good opinions, went and watched some tape, figured out what it was about safeties. Well, another year was linebackers. Last year, it was what is untapped potential? What can a coach look at on tape and go, yeah, I can do something with that. That we can fix that. Because one of the things that's really common is when you're looking at offensive linemen, for example, it's hands. Or defensive lineman, it's hands. Okay? How many guys do you guys write up every year where like he don't know how to use his hands, but he's got these traits? You probably write up a ton of dudes with that in the eval, right?
Byron Murphy almost fits that this year. He's probably the top guy. There's a lot of times where I don't think he knows how to disengage or like really use his hands early in the rep, and it gets him in trouble and his lower body bails him out. But I think you let that guy figure out how to use his hands and you're seeing like an absolute game wrecker. Because right now he's probably a little more like athlete, lower body twitch freak than what he could be with his hands. Like
I think I like his hands a little more than yours. I think that I see him with counter moves and stuff, like pre-planned counter moves.
Yeah.
I like that. You know what I'm saying? So while he might not be the best at figuring out how he's going to attack the guy straight off the rep to begin with, he's got a plan in place. He knows how he wants to go with the rep. And I think that's a big step for him. But anyways, point is, with hands, that was a question where it's like, hey, I need to talk to offensive line, defensive line coaches. I need to talk to people that would know, is this something we could work with, right? And so that was my focus this offseason was, okay, how many of these things do I write up on guys really often, and how easy is it to fix these things and the potential? Hands, it's very difficult to teach a guy how to use his hands because most guys have been using this technique, whatever they are that they're doing. They've been doing it since high school or before high school, so now you're having to erase 7-8 years of muscle memory to try to bring in a whole new system to what you're going to do. And that just doesn't work.
Yeah.
Not often, not unless you just got a guy who's devoted and dedicated, so chances are if his hands aren't good right now, they're not going to be good down the road. So that's not something you could really say, okay, well, I'm going to bet on the upside, Whereas with a Byron Murphy, like you just mentioned, that's a guy that, okay, maybe his first move isn't good, but he shows me a lot of versatility with the way that he uses his hands, that he has a counter move, that he has a plan going into a rep, that he knows what he wants to do. And so at this point, it's just refining that plan, right? And getting him to realize, hey, if you're going to set against this type of blocker where he's going to be more of a vertical setter, he's going to try to inside punch you, and this is how you need to attack him. That's when we start to talk about a guy taking that next step, and that's untapped potential because it's not something we've seen necessarily on tape. So untapped potential is a huge part of your evaluation, in my opinion, that you have to hammer down on. And that's where you really get good, is when you can figure out how much better is he going to get in 2, 3, 4 years in the league.
That could be a whole nother episode, because that's when you got to balance out, first off, like technique fundamentals, but also like physical ability, what their frames can be, how much muscle they can hold. That'd be a whole another good episode right there.
That's an off-season. That's a summer episode right there.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah,
Mark Jarvis, you got one last thing there?
I'm cooking, dude.
Let's pop.
So here we go. This perfectly ties in everything we've talked about with Jayden Daniels. Ties in consensus. Do you remember when we made that bet? Do you know what the date was?
No.
It's November 15th, okay? And it was the 1 to win 100 for Jayden Daniels to be the number one.
5 months ago.
He was ranked 40th overall on the consensus at that time, okay?
Okay.
So they played Georgia State, beat them 56-14 on November 18th. They played Texas A&M, beat them 42-30 on November 25th. He's not done anything since then. He did not go to the All-Star games. He did not measure for the combine. I don't know. Did he interview?
Yeah, he interviewed.
Okay. But he hasn't done any. There's no measurement information that's come in. As far as we know, there's nothing medical. There's nothing like any. There's basically no new information that has came about since that happened, since we made that bet, other than a game against Georgia State that most people probably did not watch and a game against Texas A&M.
Yeah.
Why did he go from 40 to 3 on the consensus?
Because he went for 300, 200 yards, first SEC player to do that.
Was it because
I'm just kidding.
Was it because he won the Heisman? Was it because people were late to catch up, right? Like he had played Bama November 4th. That's part of what helped me make that prediction to make that bet. I had seen that. A lot of people probably hadn't seen that. So when we talk about, okay, when are we making these adjustments? When are we taking in that new information that could change our minds and make us update? Like there's also a lag time for that. A lot of times you might not see something until 2-3 months later, and then you're updating. So I think that's a beautiful example of it, because there's nothing that's changed since then that should push Jayden Daniels up, but it has. Why?
Yeah.
Because people finally caught up.
So far, too. Yeah. Way up there. That's a good point. We always talk about that too. It's like people, we don't even know when we argue with people. They might have watched nothing on this guy, or way more than me. You know what I mean? Like you don't know who you're actually dealing with, or like what. That's why I think it gets kind of silly just arguing with people, especially like on Twitter about this, because you're like, who knows what they've actually seen? Like this guy is, this is silly as shit. But that's funny to hear about Jayden though. I didn't realize it was that late when we made that bet, but that's cool.
Yeah, it was super, super late.
Yeah, right on.
42 minutes in, and I think we're going to go ahead and wrap this thing up.
But we're not doing the guys we missed on, or the guys we might miss on?
We're going to have to come back to it, bro. It's been
we're going to have to come back. Yeah, it's 5:30 already.
Dang. So,
all righty.
Gentlemen, pleasure as always. You can follow Jarvis in the middle here, our AJ Hawk personality sits there just looking pretty the entire time. I'm telling you, man, we're going to get you the cigars. It's going to happen now.
If you give me the candy cigarettes, I'll do those.
Candy cigarettes, like the stage ones,
like the little like the little candy ones that the kids have.
And they like
smoke. Give me some of
do
those.
Do they make them so they look like cigars?
They make them so they look like they smoke, and you look cool. You look like a greaser.
But do they make them look like cigars?
I don't think so.
See, we got to figure out. Do they make them if they look like cigars? Yeah, I'm gonna send you a whole box,
painted brown,
and just use them on the freaking podcast. Like just Anyways, follow him at Jarvis Scouting. Follow Gam. They're on the end at Gam Scout. Gam Scout. I was about to say at Gam Scouting. I was like, wait a second, that's not right. Follow me at Draft Vogel. Follow the show at Sick Pod NFL Draft. We're going to be back at it later on. Well, I guess Monday, technically. Next episode will drop. And for you guys, for everybody here on the Sick Podcast Network, we'll talk to you later. Shane, let's go.
And that's a wrap. Hope you don't miss us too much until next time. Follow the Sick Podcast with Draft Vogel on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts.